Welcome back to A Legal Studies Teacher Reads the News. Going to be looking at a bit of a longer topic today. This is an article about sports rorts. Now, it sounds fun, sports and rorts. Often the media will chuck together words that rhyme and are catchy and easy to remember, but this is quite a serious allegation which has already received air in the media. And the government, I think, is completely culpable of this. And this is Tony Harris basically trying to explain to people why this is such a scandal. This is government corruption, according to Tony Harris. So straight away, when I'm reading an article, I like to know who I am reading. And Tony Harris is his name. If you look up Tony Harris, you find out that he is, it always tells you at the bottom of the article, a former New South Wales Auditor General and senior Commonwealth officer. So he's not a Labor Party figure or a Liberal Party figure or a national senator or anything like that. He is a bureaucrat and he is a former New South Wales Auditor General. Now, auditing is an official inspection of an organisation's accounts or a government's accounts, typically by an independent body. And that's exactly what the Auditor General does in Australia. So there's a New South Wales one for the state. We're going to be looking at the Australian National Audit Office, or ANAO here. And this tells you all about it. So what do they do? What does the Auditor General do? Under the Auditor General Act of 97, the functions include auditing financial statements of Commonwealth entities, auditing annual performance statements, conducting performance audits, assurance reviews and audits of performance measures, conducting a performance audit of a Commonwealth partner, providing other auditor service. So basically, they go away and they look at all of the numbers and they look at the process and they work out whether or not the government has been acting correctly. Now, if we're looking at the syllabus, this covers a whole bunch of things. For certain, values and ethics come into here. This question of whether the government has acted ethically, if not corruptly. Procedural fairness has the actual kind of the procedures and the way that they have carried out this actually been correct and unbiased. We're also looking at the legislative process. We're also looking at separation of powers as well. I'll show you what I mean in a second. Okay, so there's auditing. There's the Auditor General and Tony Harris, the guy writing this argument, this article, I should say, and arguing this. He's a former New South Wales Auditor General. So he did the exact same thing, but it was with the state government, not with the Commonwealth government. What does he say? Remember sports rorts? Here's why we mustn't forget that shameful episode. Before the Morrison government starts the hard sell of its budget, it's happening next week, this week I should say, it's worth recalling a recent episode it would rather the community forget. The sports rorts affair shows us that the public service is becoming a political service, that the Morrison ministry is adept at using public money for private benefits, that it is content to ignore unlawful activity, and that misleading Parliament and public is a matter of no moment. Wow, that's a starting point, isn't it? That's a starting point. How is Tony Harris going to back that up? He's basically calling the government corrupt. He's basically saying the government is using public money for their own benefit. It's ignoring people who are breaking the law, and it's misleading Parliament, it's misleading me as the public. These are the lessons of the abuse of the $100 million Community Sports Infrastructure Grants Program. The program offers a prism illuminating all that is wrong with the government. So a prism, something you look through and it kind of splits all of the, the colors of the spectrum. It makes things clearer. It's basically saying the program offers us a clear picture of everything that's wrong with the government. Here's an illustration by Simon Letch here. You've got a ball boy in here, can't believe it. There's Scott Morrison directing Bridget McKenzie, who is shooting the balls at, I'm guessing, the electorates there. People might wonder why, amid a pandemic, a recession, and the most challenging budget since World War II, we should hark back to sports rorts. But here's why. From the entrails of this shameful chapter emerge glaring examples of appalling governance that will need to be avoided as we confront the extraordinary hurdles ahead. So Tony Harris is claiming that this sports rorts program and the chapter that we're looking at shows that the government is actually governing in a shocking way, and that it needs to be fixed, because we're not talking about a $100 million program here. We're talking about billions, tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars in the middle of a global pandemic. The National Audit Office report on the program, so that's the Australian National Audit Office, released in January, had two major findings. And this is what Tony Harris said following those findings. He called for Bridget McKenzie to resign. So he was very, very much taken by that. It says this: two major findings. Grants were made by the then Sports Minister, Bridget McKenzie, without evident legal capacity. In other words, she decided where the money went. That is actually not her role. That is the role of Sports Australia, an independent statutory body. So, first of all, she made the grants, and the grants were influenced by applicants' electorate locations. Applicants' electorate locations. In other words, she doled out public money based on where you were living to make it more likely that her government would be elected again. She took your money, she chose based on where the electorate was, and your community organisations received their grants based on which electorate they were in, rather than whether or not it was a worthy application for money. The Prime Minister added a third issue by claiming that neither he nor his office was involved in selecting successful applicants when evidence showed that they were major players. Okay, so straight up, there's a huge thing. Prime Minister has claimed he had nothing to do with it, and there's evidence that shows that, in fact, his office were major players in these decisions. We know the government trashed the sports grants program by replacing 300 applicants selected by the Sports Commission. We know the government's choices were aimed at marginal and targeted seats. We know ministers used public money to advance their political prospects in the 2019 election. Now, there's a whole bunch, and you can go and find the articles. Have a search for sports rorts, have a search for a couple of those key terms: Sports Commission, sports rorts, Bridget McKenzie. You will find a whole bunch of information that proves beyond doubt that that's what occurred. That's why Tony Harris is speaking with the we know. It is more worrying that many government agencies enabled this travesty. It is more worrying that many government agencies enabled this travesty. So Tony Harris here has stopped saying, look, the sports rorts is basic government corruption. They've taken public money and they've replaced better applications for community grants, for sporting community grants, with ones from marginal electorates to make their election more secure. But actually what he's saying, it's more worrying that government agencies allowed it to happen. This includes the Australian Sports Commission and the Department of Health and the Prime Minister and Cabinet. To add flavour, our Attorney General, Christian Porter, played his usual political part, and the Australian Federal Police abetted it all by doing nothing. Wow, so Tony Harris here really is kind of doubling down here. What is he saying? Basically claiming that the people, the bureaucracy that are supposed to be upholding the law and ensuring that political decisions do not go in favour of government, proper, procedurally fair decisions, didn't do their bit. To allocate responsibility, we start with finding who decided the grants. The Prime Minister says the decision maker was the Sports Minister, McKenzie. The program guidelines said she would be the decision maker, and McKenzie resigned from the ministry because she made a grant to a sports body with which she had an undisclosed relationship. So she literally was a part of the club and she gave them money. That was found out. She had to resign because of not because of her running and her making decisions and kind of changing from one application to another based on its electoral marginability. No. Because she was a part of I believe it was a shooting club. But many, including the Audit Office, find that McKenzie had no evident legal power to make any grant decision. Senior lawyers told the Senate Select Committee examining the matter the power to make grants was vested solely in the Sports Commission. No lawyer provided contrary evidence. Okay, so this is the Australian Sports Commission, It's changed its name to Sport Australia now. It's Australia's primary national sports administration and advisory agency. It gets the appropriations money from Parliament and it decides how to spend it. It's recognised as a world leader in encouraging participation in sport, has all these things. It's governed by a board of commissioners appointed by the Australian government. The board determines Sports Australia overall direction, decides on the actual allocation of resources. Right there. Decides on the actual allocation of resources. The Sports Commission has a muddled view. It firstly told the Senate committee that McKenzie was always to be the decision maker. The Commission merely provided its assessments to her. So note that they're actually the ones that are supposed to be making these decisions. They're supposed to receive the applications, they're supposed to be independent, and they're supposed to say, here is the 300 or 400 most worthy applications based on an independent kind of review of all these criteria, and then they're supposed to hand the money out. They're saying, oh, no, that's not what we did. We provided our assessments, and the government got to choose. Bridget McKenzie got to choose where to spend that money. The Commission subsequently offered to provide a confidential summary of a legal opinion. It separately advised the Senate committee that the Commission exercised its own powers under Section 8 of the Sports Commission Act to make grants and enter into contracts. Okay, so here's the Australian Sports Commission Act. Okay, if we were to click on it and to go to Section 8, here we are down here. Powers. Has the power to enter into contracts, acquire, hold, etc., make grants or lend money, provide scholarships or benefits, and appoint agents, etc. So it has that power. It advised the Senate that they did exercise their power there. The Commission thus admits it chose to replace applicants it had selected with those nominated by McKenzie because it was open to the Commission to take account of the Minister's approval. Of course, the Commission did more than take the Minister's choices into account. It abdicated responsibility by unlawfully adopting the government selections. Note this bit. About 43% of those were judged by the Audit Office to be ineligible for any grant. Okay, that right there, if you're a tax-paying Australian citizen, should make your blood boil. The Australian Sports Commission has received all of these applications by Australian community sporting groups. Volunteers have sat down, have spent their own personal time. They've gone through, they've discussed with builders, with engineers, this is what we're looking at building, this is how much it's going to cost. They've got questionnaires involved. They've asked the community, what are you doing here? They've filled out a huge process and they have handed it into an independent organisation, Sports Australia. And Sports Australia has given those to the Minister and she has said, that's great. Then she's replaced 300 of them with other applications that were made for more marginal electorates. And 43% of them were judged to be ineligible. In other words, according to all the criteria, they shouldn't have received any grant at all. And yet they did. Morrison was wrong to say McKenzie was the lawful decision maker. Note here, Tony Harris, and this is something you should think through. He's referring to former Minister Bridget McKenzie as McKenzie. He's referring to Prime Minister Scott Morrison as Morrison. Tony Harrison clearly is not happy with this situation, and you know what? I can't blame him. Morrison was wrong to say McKenzie was the lawful decision maker. The funding of the program came from appropriations Parliament made to the Independent Sports Commission. The Commission used its powers to award grants. The Commission was the decision maker. This is why the Beechworth Lawn Tennis Club, one of those taken off the successful list, is suing the Commission. So straight up, they have made an application. Theirs has been successful. The Minister has made a political decision, taken them off the register. They are suing the Commission and saying, where's our money? The 13 members of the Sports Commission include several who have been awarded Australian honours, a couple of Liberal Party enthusiasts, a sprinkling of investment and merchant bankers, and former sports people active in sports management. Commission evidence to the Senate committee shows that Commission members failed their first duty to protect the Commission. They further failed by not resigning. They wrongly believe they did a good job or prefer the privileges of their appointments. Okay, so there's Tony Harrison just unloading on the 13 members of the Sports Commission. They're here. I won't show you who they are, but you can look it up yourself. And he's basically claiming that they really had a responsibility and they didn't uphold it. They allowed Bridget McKenzie to make those decisions, and therefore they really haven't done their job. That's what Tony Harris is claiming. The Secretary of the Department of Health is an ex officio member of the Commission. This commonly used provision allows the responsible minister an insider's view of an independent agency. This arrangement can, however, cause conflicts of interest. The ex officio member has a responsibility both to advance the minister's and the Commission's sometimes conflicting interests. So, in other words, you've got here this question of the separation of powers. You've got an independent group here that's working in executing the law. It's part of the executive, executing the law, giving out money, etc., etc., etc. And yet you've got this concept where the Secretary of the Department of Health is a member of the Commission. And so there's this conflict of interest here. We know little about the contribution of the then Health Secretary, Gladys Beauchamp. While the Commission and her minister were selecting different applicants, Beauchamp did not make an opening statement to the Senate committee, and on 8 occasions she was unable to recollect events. We know that as a very common thing that happens when people are asked to discuss something where there's a bit of controversy. They often don't recollect things. She did advise the committee that in anticipation of her retirement, she had destroyed all her notebooks. Look at that. Year 12 students, you finish the HSC, you go in the backyard, you get yourself a big barrel like a washing machine, you throw all your books in there and you burn them. This woman, note that, Health Secretary, she's got an incredibly important job. She's been doing it, and she decides to destroy all her notebooks upon retiring. Wow. She says she saw no conflict of interest in this grants matter and did not recuse herself from relevant board meetings. Well, guess what? We have to take her word for it because she's destroyed any evidence of anything that she wrote down during that time and can't recall events. But we know from McKenzie's evidence that the department and the commission failed to inform the minister that she could not lawfully be the decision maker for the sports grants. She failed to say, you're not allowed to do this. Phil Gaitchen also has a role worth examining. So Gaitchens sorry, Philip, if I've said your name wrong there. Gaitchens was Chief of Staff in Prime Minister Morrison's office from 2015 to 2018. From August 2018, he worked for Prime Minister Morrison as Head of Treasury. In 2019, he was appointed Secretary to the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. In light of the Audit Office report on sports grants, okay, so the Auditor General has had a scathing report released in January saying, you guys have broken the law. In light of that, Prime Minister Morrison instructed Gaitchens to investigate any breaches of the Statement of Ministerial Standards by McKenzie. The government has not released his report, but he advised the Senate committee that Senator McKenzie acted within the remit of the guidelines. Just have a think about that for a second. The Prime Minister has instructed Philip Gaitchens to investigate any breaches. Philip Gaitchens, who was his Chief of Staff for 3 years. And he's gone, you know what, we're not going to release the report, but she's fine. Gaitchens concluded that McKenzie breached the standards by failing. But he advised the committee that Senator McKenzie acted within the remit of the guidelines. He concluded McKenzie breached the standards by failing to declare membership of 2 organisations. So he said, look, she hasn't necessarily broken the law here. What she has done is she's failed to declare membership of 2 organisations, and she's given money to those organisations. Gaitchens perfectly accommodated the government's political problems. The uproar following the audit report meant McKenzie could not remain in the ministry, but her failings had to be personal. They could not reveal government failures, and the role played by Morrison and his office had to be quarantined. In other words, we don't know at this stage how much of a role Prime Minister Morrison had in making these decisions for this. And what Gaitchens has managed to do, he's been given a very specific task, look and see if she's breached the ministerial standards. And he's found, look, she did everything she was supposed to do here, and he's found 2 things she's done which are she's personally responsible for, and they've basically created a scapegoat for her, or out of her. Against these criteria, the Gaitchens report is faultless. Senator McKenzie resigned from the ministry because of a personal error that did not involve Prime Minister, and Gaiters avoided material implicating the Prime Minister. Against other criteria, the report fails. One weakness is that Gaiters is not an independent investigator. Gaiters' preface of his report shows he failed to examine the first of the ministerial standards he was meant to consider, whether McKenzie had any power to be the decision maker. When asked whether McKenzie could lawfully be the decision maker, Gaiters said that was a matter for others. He's not a lawyer. Perhaps not, but Gaiters didn't seek to find out. So he's involved, he's asked, has she breached any ministerial standards? He has not come back and said, well, she made decisions that she wasn't allowed to make. And so when someone's asked, hang on, the first standard is whether or not she's allowed to be the decision maker, and he's gone, well, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't make that decision. And no, I didn't try and find out by, I don't know, speaking to a lawyer. Knowledge weighs heavily on the heads of advisors. Unlike the Auditor General, Gaiters found no bias in the grants made by McKenzie. This finding, he explained, was the result of arithmetic. But as a member of the Senate committee observed, Gaiters examined only grants made, not grants discarded. So he's been very, very, very careful in what he's looked into and in the findings that he has found. As Gaiters said, he's no lawyer. He also seems to be no mathematician. Lawyers defending O.J. Simpson against the charge of murdering his wife told the jury that Simpson's assault on his wife was irrelevant because few assaulting husbands killed their wives. The better result is found by asking the right question. How many murdered wives were killed by their husbands? As the Auditor General, Grant Herhere, observed, Gaiters' arithmetic did not persuade him to change his finding. Okay, so this is Grant Herhere. He's the Auditor General. What then of Christian Porter, the Attorney General? So he's the top kind of in charge of the law in Australia, who swore an oath to uphold the law. It seems the need of politics was greater than the need of law, according to Tony Harris. Porter seems unperturbed that the government had no constitutional power to fund change rooms or toilets for sporting groups. And he shows no concern over McKenzie's decision making. So here's this question of values and ethics, this question of legislative process, this question of where is your power deriving from, and who is actually carrying out these decisions. So a whole bunch of areas that are here. Obviously, a whole bunch of these are carried as well. Continuing. Morrison, with Porter at his side, suggested, mumbled's a better term, that he had had legal advice that McKenzie could be the decision maker. That's interesting. Gaiters confirmed that Porter gave an opinion, but that's worrisome. Attorneys General typically provide legal advice when real lawyers will not provide the right advice. Okay, so there's this claim from the government that no, McKenzie was fine making those decisions. That's legal advice. It's also possible that Porter did not give a formal opinion. If such advice exists, the Senate committee has not seen it. Even Gaiters had not seen it when he prepared his report, remember. Central to this matter is the role of the then Sports Minister, Bridget McKenzie. She orchestrated the grant process through to the eve of the election. She selected applicants whether or not they met the published guidelines. McKenzie's criteria meant that one project, which the Sports Commission scored at 98 points, failed, while another with 4 points was funded. Can you imagine being that volunteer Australian citizen that has sat there, worked through the application process, spent a whole bunch of your own time, money and effort organising it and reading this in the paper? Even Gaiters observed there were some significant shortcomings with respect to the minister's decision-making role. Were they? Significant shortcomings indeed. McKenzie, with no evident authority, directed funds that had been provided to the Independent Sports Commission. Remember, these are the guys that are supposed to be carrying it out. This is not an arcane matter. Parliament creates independent statutory bodies in part to insulate their work from political manipulation. The importance of the rule of law for society, the relationship between different legal institutions and jurisdictions, the development of the law as a reflection of society, and the influences on the Australian legal system. Political manipulation, indeed. McKenzie has advanced the defence of ignorance. Last May, she told the ABC, if there was any issues around the legality of how this program was going to be run, then my expectation of the Australian Public Service is that they would have raised it with me. Okay, no, she's the minister in charge. She's basically saying, look, if I acted illegally, someone should have told me. McKenzie was not advised by the Sports Office in her department or by the Sports Commission that she had no power to make grants. The Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet offered her no protection. The Department of Finance, which monitors these programs, raised no problems with the minister's public role of decision maker. This failure to provide legal advice adds to other examples of departments bowing to political pressure. Departments failed to advise ministers that robo-debt was unlawful. The Agriculture Department failed to tell its minister whether export of live sheep was contrary to law. Departments changed staffing decisions to respond to ministers' pressure. Departments increasingly provide draft advice to the government in case it is unwanted. The public service is failing to give ministers advice that it is politically unpalatable. This failure was encouraged when the government urged public servants to concentrate on advancing the government's agenda. So Tony Harris here, former Auditor General for New South Wales, is making a huge point here. He's saying that this separation between the executive and between the political party, the government, is not working as it should. McKenzie's actions might allow a common law claim of misfeasance in office. The federal court recently found that Senator Joe Ludwig, former agricultural minister, committed misfeasance in 2011 when he acted unlawfully in prohibiting the export of live animals to the detriment of graziers. The court ordered the government to compensate affected parties. Sport applicants who unfairly lost grants would similarly have cause to sue for compensation. Misfeasance is a civil matter, but it also is an abuse of public office. It can lead to criminal prosecution under the Criminal Code Act of 1995. Wow. McKenzie raised the possibility of another crime under that act when she claimed her signed and dated determination of grantees was altered without her knowledge. Wow, okay. The Senate committee found email evidence that these substituted grantees had been selected in the Prime Minister's office. Wow. This brings us to the role of Scott Morrison, Prime Minister Scott Morrison, and his office. Prime Minister Morrison has advanced 2 responses to charges that he and his office played a key role in undermining the sports program's program. In the first version, given in January, remember that's when this thing was released, at the National Press Club, Prime Minister Morrison said, "All we did was provide information based on the representations made to us." Really? All we did. They just passed it on to the sports minister, apparently. The evidence in the many messages between Morrison's and McKenzie's office belies this, and recent evidence to the Senate committee shows that the 2 offices wanted to increase the funding of the program so that more applicants from marginal and targeted seats could be selected. Prime Minister Morrison now says that neither he nor his office was decision makers, but in this matter, those who signed the documents and those who guided the elbow of the signer are equally implicated, according to Tony Harris. Who's going to resolve this mess? We cannot rely on Federal Anti-Corruption Commission because Porter has failed to establish one. Attorney General Christian Porter, that is. We cannot rely on the Australian Federal Police because, as AFP Commissioner Reece Kershaw recently told the National Press Club, matters of corruption need to be referred. That leaves the Senate, the National Audit Office, and the media. Tony Harris is a former New South Wales Auditor General and Senior Commonwealth Officer. So this is a huge scandal. It's a scandal that can be talked about and looked at because it actually covers so much of this concept. I mean, you could even do it as not so much the individual and the law, but the law and practice. A whole bunch of those themes work really well. It's a contemporary issue. You can look at cases. So you've got a case there of the Attorney General of the Minister for Agriculture. You've got a bunch of laws, the Sports Commission. You've got a whole bunch of things that can be discussed. And really, it's also about resolving disputes, isn't it? So you can talk about legal methods of resolving disputes. And in this case, you'd be talking about clubs, sporting organisations, for example, this one, that is suing. Where are they? The Beechworth Lawn Tennis Club is suing the state government, the Sports Commission, not the state government, is suing the Sports Commission because its application was taken off the successful list. So basically it's saying, you gave us criteria, we met that criteria, we didn't get a grant because of this reason, so they're taking them to court. So there's heaps there that you can look at. I mean, overall though, it's a really good example to show legal studies students that Australia is not this perfect country with all these laws that are all followed and there's no problems here. That politics gets involved in everything, and that the government here surely has a lot of questions to answer. And it's really, really easy to get caught up and to think, oh, it's just all politics as usual, etc., etc. Whereas, and therefore kind of separate it, call it the Canberra bubble. But at the end of the day, this is Australia's money. This is my money that was spent. This is my taxpayer money that was given to people that didn't deserve it because they live in a certain area. Remember, 43%, 300 applicants were replaced, and 43% of them were ineligible, but received it because they lived in a certain area, and it would be better for the government if they receive that money. There it is. Okay, so it's looking at the audit office and how it works. It'd be well worth looking at the actual report itself. So audit reports, whole bunch of stuff here that you can look for. And it shows government working. It shows problems in the government. It shows bureaucracy working. It shows problems with bureaucracy. And Tony Harris's article where he's begging, you can tell right here, he is saying, we don't have a federal ICAC. New South Wales has a federal ICAC, Independent Commission Against Corruption. It's an independent statutory body that looks at corruption within bureaucracy, within the New South Wales state Labor and Liberal Party and National Party and all of the government. And it has strong powers to force people to come, and multiple ministers have been caught being corrupt and have been jailed and had to pay money back, etc., etc., etc. We don't have one for the Commonwealth. Why is that? I'm going to put it out there. Perhaps the people that make decisions like this don't want an all-powerful independent body that is able to force them to commit and to answer questions and to submit and subpoena documents and to actually hold them to account. So here's Tony Harris saying, look, we don't have one of those. Who's going to resolve the mess? Well, the police, the federal police say, no, it's corruption, so it's not what we do. It's not within our remit. That leaves the Senate, the National Audit Office, and the media, which he has availed himself of today. Hopefully that's a helpful kind of contemporary issue that you could look at in your class to think through how Australia functions, and hopefully it's something that you're actually unhappy about, because I am 100% unhappy about that, about corruption within Australian Commonwealth and the fact that we don't have an ICAC to deal with this.